Hey, so I wasn't thinking about doing a video originally, but I came across this book called What to Say When, the complete new guide to discussing abortion. And this is being promoted as being the book that is converting people away from the pro-choice position and over to the pro-life position in droves and record numbers, all of that. And so, periodically I will do deconstructions of books that I disagree with. And in the course of doing that, I will often do long multi-part video series where I deconstruct all of the ideas of a book and that sort of thing. And in this case, I really don't think that will be necessary because the introduction and first chapter that are provided by Amazon are uh, really enough to deconstruct a lot of these ideas. But maybe my curiosity will get the better of me and I'll get into the rest of the book. Whatever the case, I just wanted to respond to this now and for the sake of discussing these ideas. So, one of the first things that it talks about in how to make this argument, it begins with a panel discussion that supposedly took place at Texas A&M University, where a bunch of PhD level scientists were awaiting questions from students on the subject of abortion. And this one student asked this question, said, "Student, doctor, your work and research are so impressive and known to everyone in this room. Would you say that from your expertise, our DNA and genetic makeup are all there from the moment of conception?" Geneticist: "Yes, that is clear from science." Student: "Once conception occurs, we have a unique, unrepeatable human being." Geneticist: "Yes, correct." Student: "It just seems inconsistent for you as a scientist to prove life begins in the womb at conception and yet believe we can take that life through abortion." Geneticist: "Well, I can't let my professional scientific research influence someone's belief about human life." I should emphasize here now, if you're just coming to this discussion, I do identify as a Christian, and I do identify as a Christian, and I am not trying to make this into any kind of atheist Christian debate or anything like that. But I dispute whether or not this conversation ever actually occurred. And the reason I dispute it is, one, this does not sound like things that human beings would, this does not sound like a way two human beings would actually communicate with one another. Um, and two, because this argument is so ridiculous that even I, as a non-geneticist or a layman in the field, could dispute it very simply. And if some actual scientist would like to come along and clarify what I'm saying here or explain it better or something like that, but I think even in just my own autodidactic understanding of the subject matter, it's fairly easy to refute. And that is to say that your genetic code, your DNA and genetic material, are not a blueprint, they're a recipe. So, for example, using that analogy, if you can make a recipe multiple times and not come out with the exact same dish every time. There will still be wide variations within that dish. So, by the same token, uh, if you were to take two seeds for the same type of tree, if you were to clone one seed and have two seeds with the exact same information in them and plant those seeds, you would not come out with two trees that looked exactly alike. You would come out with two separate trees that had the same genetic information. And the same thing is true of people. If you were to, not that this could be done currently, but if you were to take that embryo and extract its DNA sequence, its DNA sequence, all of its genetic information, and recreate that genetic information in another embryo artificially, you would not get two of the same person. You would get two wholly separate, different people that had the same genetic information. So, and they may have a great many similar factors. They may have similarities in appearance. They may have similarities in, um, with genetic predispositions towards certain disabilities or illnesses or things like that. They may both be of the same race, all of the same race, the same general appearance, and that sort of thing. But they will be two wholly separate people. They will not comprehend themselves as being both the same singular person. They will be two separate entities and understand themselves as such. So that idea, that statement, the idea that a geneticist would be dumbfounded by that statement already indicates it already indicates a lack of understanding of the material at hand, and I think indicates that this is a conversation that either did not occur or did not actually occur under the circumstances, or did not have the actual dialogue that they're saying that it did. Anyway, so going on, their basic premise is that for too long for too long the pro-choice side has been on the offense, and it's time to put them on the defense. In reality, this is absolute horseshit. The pro-life side has been completely on the offense from the get-go. They have been campaigning for this. They have been actively disseminating information, supporting their point of view. They have been organizing against abortion. They have been on the offense. So the idea that you as the presumed pro-life person ought to suddenly carry yourself as newly being on the offense, as if this is something that has not already been going on, is similarly horseshit. But anyway, moving forward, I wanted to take issue with a few things that they say. So it's interesting. They say that the old stereotypes are gone, and they try to say that the stereotypes about anti-abortionists being emotional and pro-abortion people being rational and scientific are gone, and that there's a new understanding that actually science is now supposedly on the side of the pro-life crowd, and that the pro-choice crowd are the ones that are guided by wild emotion and no science. That is, again, also supported by nothing, and it's yet again one of those things that smacks of being similarly being like the Christian apologetics that try to say that, oh, well, creationism, the science is not only on the side of creationism, but it's newly on the side of creationism, that there's new information that's emerged that supports creationism. It's that kind of thing. And they just say this, they just say this supported by nothing. So then they go on, they make a point about saying that that abortion is the only field where medical personnel where there are these moral and ethical qualms within the medical field itself about this issue, and that it's the only field where providers will go from being in favor of it to opposed to it. That's also not true. We already know it's not true. For example, and by the way, I got wind of this by hearing Matt Walsh hawking it on his podcast, and he also wrote the foreword for this book. So anyway, he already would be aware of and be forced to acknowledge, for example, in the realm of gender reassignment surgery, there's already a tremendous ethical divide within that. There are doctors that have previously performed it that will no longer perform that anymore. So abortion is hardly the only area of medicine or of medical care where people suddenly have a change of position about the matter or something like that. Disagreements within fields of medicine do occur. But anyway, so what's funny is they want to acknowledge that there are certain they want to acknowledge that some of the pro-life stereotypes are inaccurate, and they acknowledge in the text that not all people who provide abortions are doing so out of a desire to kill as many babies as possible. Granted, some do. It says, granted, some do, but not everybody. And that's like, okay, if you think that that's actually occurring, you need to produce the people who are providing abortions for the sake of killing as many babies as possible. That's their actual motive. Find me those people instead of just claiming in the abstract that they exist. So anyway, moving forward. So what it gets into is they say they do this. They go. I'm going into chapter 1 now. They talk about how you should remain cool and confident and compassionate and patient and understanding when you talk to people, which granted, that is certainly an agreeable way to go about things. I have no problem with that. So I'll go skip point 1 and go to point 2 in chapter 1. Point 2 is don't let abortion advocates distract you. So the idea is that abortion advocates will say ridiculous things that have nothing to do with the issue at hand or distract from the actual discussion. And the examples they say, nor does respecting abortion advocates require us to address the many ridiculous hypothetical arguments used to justify killing an innocent baby. One famous argument compares an unborn baby to a kidnapper experiencing renal failure who takes you hostage to steal your kidney function. Another bizarre hypothetical situation concerns conjoined twins. After the twins are born, one becomes sick with a deadly virus. The other twin will become infected shortly thereafter, and both will die. Shouldn't we kill the twin with the deadly virus to save the other before he becomes infected? After all, the twin with the virus was going to die anyway. Okay, so those two examples that they provide. These are different types of examples. The first one is a hypothetical example to illustrate a situation where the gravitas of loss of human life is comparable to that of what occurs between a pregnant woman and the pregnancy itself. So that is the first example. The second example, however, is a perfectly reasonable thing to consider. That is something that actually does occur, and that is a medical ethical concern that does arise. Now, the critical element they're leaving out of that example is this, and that is you're talking about a situation where two conjoined twins cannot be separated without one of them dying. And what that means is that the two conjoined twins, one of them does not have all of the necessary organs to survive separate from its twin, and therefore separating them means ending the life of one of them. And so leaving out that crucial piece of information, now we understand why in that situation one of the twins would have to be left to die, or would have to die so that the other one can survive. So they're being already completely intellectually disingenuous there. All right. And so this is what they say. This is the quote. It's in italics. So I guess this is meant to be the quote of what you should say in response to those two arguments. What? Why do you need bizarre hypothetical scenarios to justify the most common surgical procedure in the world, which has been legal in the United States for 50 years and happens 73 million times worldwide every year? I can legally take my wife in to have a late-term abortion. I love how they assume that this would be going on among men. Anyway, the discussion would be to say, I can legally take my wife in to have a late-term abortion the day before my daughter's due date. Why do you feel the need to justify that with some ridiculous hypothetical? Okay, already that argument is being made in bad faith. There is a ridiculous, totally unfounded, totally unsupported conspiracy theory among the anti-abortion community of this country. They are circulating a complete bullshit piece of information or bullshit idea, and so much so that I did a previous video on this topic called Refuting Ben Shapiro on abortion, and I brought this up there as well. Nobody gets to the late stages of pregnancy. Nobody is getting to the late stages of pregnancy and deciding at that point that they no longer want to be parents. That they no longer, women are not deciding that they don't want to be mothers at that point. If they have gotten to the late stages of abortion, I'm sorry, the late stages of pregnancy, forgive me. If they've gotten to the late stages of pregnancy and are deciding to have an abortion, they are not doing that because they have whimsically decided not to be mothers anymore. That is not what is occurring. At that point, it is happening because there are medical reasons necessitating it. The pro-life contingent does absolutely nothing to support the idea that women are randomly choosing to have late-term abortions all willy-nilly apropos of nothing. They don't support it because they can't support it. It is a lie. It is not happening. If I gave in that aforementioned video I mentioned, Refuting Ben Shapiro on Abortion, I gave the I gave the example of an op-ed that I read in Cosmopolitan magazine, and I read it in the video itself. It was from a woman who she and her husband found out late in a late stage of their pregnancy that their child was going to die minutes after it was born, and not only that, it would die in excruciating pain. And it had there was a rare defect that could not be detected until the late stages of pregnancy, and they found out that knowing this, the child would die if it was born. There was no reason to bring it into the world unless you are unless you choose. I've heard people say, well, I've heard about people in this kind of situation and they enjoyed having that 5 minutes of time with their baby or something. If you choose that, you choose it, but you don't force it on other people. Anyway, there was no reason to have to carry this pregnancy to term. This was a child that was inevitably going to die, and inevitably going to die in extreme pain. And and so the mother, and we'll say that, yes, the mother decided that it was necessary to terminate the pregnancy for that reason, and also because she did not want to have to endure weeks of people seeing her pregnant, congratulating her on her pregnancy, and then her having to either lie to them or tell them that the baby was going to die shortly after birth and they were just carrying it to term. So for those reasons, they decided that it was best to terminate the pregnancy. That's the reality of late-term abortion. The pro-lifers are lying to you when they make these arguments. They are absolutely lying to you. So I'm going to pause here to take my pizza out of the oven, and no, it is not a pizza until it comes out of the oven. Anyway, I'll be right back. Okay, so what they do is they ask a series of questions and these are supposed to be the questions that will help you guide a pro-choice person over to the pro-life position, and it says you have to ask at least 4 of these. Now, obviously, these questions are not the end of the discussion. They are prompts to initiate a larger discussion with the person. So anyway, I will answer these questions. However, these questions do not stump me. They are not gotcha questions. They are not difficult for me at all, and this is why I don't think I have to refute the entire book. So the first question is, what is an abortion? An abortion is the medical termination of a pregnancy. Yes, that is the ending of an organic life. I don't dispute that. But for personal reasons, I don't believe that there is any, for personal reasons which will be elaborated in the rest of these questions, I don't think that there is anything morally wrong with that termination. Okay, why do you support abortion? Okay, so that is a much broader question. To put it as directly as possible, there are 3 reasons. 1, I don't believe that any free society can impose any kind of slavery or indentured servitude on free people for any reasons. I don't think there is any reason to force people to do any kind of forced labor. So that takes it out of the discussion already. Secondly, the second reason is that if I were a person who was reasonably pro-life, meaning that I was leaning towards the pro-life position, but acknowledged that there were reasonable circumstances where abortion was acceptable, such as to save the life of the mother, what then I would find myself doing is being forced to honestly and sincerely look at actual cases where people have decided to have abortions. And I feel like what would happen were I in that position, what would happen is I would find myself repeatedly being forced to concede over and over again positions where yes, it was the correct, morally correct thing to do, that having the abortion was the best thing for the mother from a safety perspective, for reasons like I outlined earlier in that Cosmopolitan magazine article. Over and over again, I would have to keep having to come to conclusions where yes, this is okay, yes, this is okay, yes, this is okay, knowing that that would be my position if I were approaching a pro-life position from a reasonable stance. Knowing that, I therefore realize that it is wholly and completely impractical to try to mitigate and legislate upon the morality of every single abortion that occurs. I would realize that it is not only practical but a moral imperative to leave that decision up to the mother. At which point, I'm no longer pro-life; I become pro-choice. So that's my second reason. The third reason, and this is one that's not going to sit well with a lot of people, but so be it, is that I do believe that people in a society need to be allowed the capacity to have recreational sex in a consequence-free environment. And don't misunderstand me. I do think that contraception and birth control, medical birth control, and all of that are all things that should be regularly and readily practiced by all people. But I do believe that we as a society need to have the capacity for that. Now, that does not mean that everybody ought to be participating in that. You have to decide assuming you have the capacity to give informed consent, you have to decide for yourself whether or not you want to participate in that. Even if we had readily available orgies with comely, desirable people, I don't know that I would want to participate in that. But I do believe that, in principle, as a society, we need to have the capacity for people to have the ability to have recreational sex, because the reality of it is that they are going to. Whether or not they live in a world where they can have recreational consequence-free sex, they're going to live as if they do have recreational consequence-free sex. So the best thing we can do is mitigate the consequences of that rather than pursuing these pie-in-the-sky notions about abstinence. So that's a third reason. It's not the only reason, but it is a reason. All right. When are you comfortable with the baby being aborted? Is there a point in the pregnancy when you would oppose abortion? So you're asking two questions there. When are you comfortable with a baby being aborted? In all of these circumstances, I choose to leave that up to the person having the pregnancy, carrying the pregnancy to term. That's the real question. So when am I comfortable with a baby being aborted? The idea, put it this way, there's no point at which the idea of an abortion is in and of itself comforting. It is a significant thing. It is something that needs to be considered. It is not something that should be done lightly, in my opinion. The difference is, I, as a libertarian, have a very strong aversion to imposing my morality on people, to telling them how to live their lives. So because of that being my base premise, whatever I feel personally, I'm not going to go impose that on other people. Now, to more directly answer the question, is there a point in pregnancy when you would oppose abortion? The best answer I can give you is that if I were pregnant, there would be a point in my pregnancy where I was no longer comfortable with the idea of an abortion. However, granted, I will never become pregnant, but my moral position, what you're really asking me is there a point where you would be okay overriding the decision of another person and imposing pregnancy upon them? And no, there never would be. So my my desire ultimately would be for pregnancies, or excuse me, for abortions to occur as soon after conception as possible, when the process is the easiest, the cheapest, and when there is the least amount of any kind of large scale public discussion over whether or not the entity being aborted is viable outside of the mother. So that's the ideal situation. But as I said before, there's no way to unilaterally apply a pro-life solution that's going to account for every possible circumstance. So anyway, so no, there's no point at which I would impose that on another person. Anyway, many people feel uncomfortable with a clearly pregnant woman at 25 weeks or 35 weeks of pregnancy having an abortion. What is your cutoff for when a baby should not be aborted? There's not one, because I understand that necessity can arise at any time. And I understand that it is not impractical, useless, and potentially detrimental for me to impose my need for emotional comfort on other people's decision-making process every time that decision needs to be made. Is your support for abortion or any restrictions on abortion that you favor based on science or more of a gut feeling? It's not based on either one. I don't believe I've cited science, with the exception of putting to rest that ridiculous geneticist argument, which is not something I would put on the table in the first place. Nothing I've said here is based around science or gut feeling. I mean, you could say it's gut feeling on the level of I have a strong gut feeling reaction against forcing people to perform labor against their will, against telling people that they cannot have sex under circumstances that they approve of, against a lot of things like that. But those are based on pre-existing those are based on pre-existing and universally applied moral dictates within my system of morality. They're not unique to abortion. So I wouldn't say that it's happening in either case. Moving on, do you think that the human dignity of babies in the womb increases over time? No, because I think that I would say that our concept of how we honor dignity changes over time. So that's the difference. And what's interesting is they're and I bring that up because they are presuming that the termination of the pregnancy is undignified. And I don't think you can reasonably make that argument. The evidence of that is that the same people who are pro-life in this circumstance will be pro-life in the circumstance of people who are terminally ill or in a persistent vegetative state that need to be taken off life support. So, for example, when Terry Schiavo died, I think it was highly, highly undignified to show her in her persistent vegetative state on national television. I think if she actually could comment on that, she would be mortified. Being seen that way, she'd be mortified. Similarly, when my grandfather died of Alzheimer's, and when he was taken off life support, they could not directly terminate his life, even though it was impossible for him to improve. All they could do was allow him to starve to death and waste away and dehydrate and waste away. And I think that is a horribly undignified way for somebody to expire. So I don't think that life or the persistence of life in and of itself necessarily creates a circumstance of dignity. That's the issue. And I realize it probably is, hang on, I just need to make sure my... Sorry, Mitzi's not getting my pizza. Anyway, so I know it sounds like in a lot of these cases I'm probably dodging the questions. I'm really not. I can't give you the kind of answer that you want, which is, I know all of these questions are structured in such a way as to provide a window into making a pro-life argument, and my honest answers to these questions will not allow you to do that. So not because I'm negating the nature of the question, but because these are my honest answers. Anyway, so are babies to you more valuable at 25 weeks than 12 weeks? Well, to sound like Jordan Peterson, you have to ask whether or not you think babies are valuable first. I'm not saying he would say that, but it gives me an opportunity to do my Jordan Peterson impression. Anyway, but yeah, that's the question. You have to argue first that babies are valuable at all. The question becomes then to them, at what point do you think that babies are valuable? Now, I don't need to wait for the answer because I know that at the nanosecond the sperm penetrates the egg, they think it has value. So I don't think that either one is necessarily valuable in the grand scheme of things, because the only way in which a pregnancy in and of itself would become inherently valuable, it depends on how you define value is the real thing. So if a pregnancy became the only point at which a pregnancy could become in and of itself could become valuable to society as a whole is if that society is facing extinction. And the human race as a whole is not facing extinction. If there were any individual society that were facing extinction, you could import people from elsewhere easily before you had to go around mandating pregnancy or imposing some kind of pregnancy quota or something like that. But that's the point at which if the human race were facing extinction, that's the point at which a pregnancy in and of itself becomes inherently valuable. And value increases over time and continues to increase outside of the womb. So, a scientist who is out there discovering new cures for disease is objectively of more value to society than, say, a spree killer or a serial killer or something like that. At that point, there's a greater value to society. But I don't. So I think that value develops over time. Both of those persons, both of those persons described when they're in the womb, are just potentialities, and their potentials to go either way in both cases. So I don't think it depends on your definition of value, and because it depends on your definition of value, you start having to ask. Inevitably, you have to define it, and then that definition becomes just that definition kind of inevitably causes the question to fall apart, because you come back to the point of the pregnancy ultimately being a potential for value, not value in and of itself, which is provided at the individual level, and that increases over the course of an entire life, increases or decreases over the course of an entire lifetime. So then, since abortion was legalized in 1973, do you ever feel like the science that supported legalizing it has become outdated? No. I'm not aware of science that's become outdated, but if it had become outdated, I would imagine that there's current science. I would imagine that they're asking that question knowing that they have an argument to further support it. But I would imagine if that science had become outdated, there would be science that would further support and justify it down the line. Anyway, how do they actually do an abortion? I'm well aware of how an abortion is performed, and I know it's not pretty. I'm not going to elaborate on it here because I'm about to eat. Anyway, as technology and science advance, medical journals report that babies can survive outside the womb at earlier and earlier points in pregnancy, but abortion laws have not adjusted accordingly. Are you okay with doing surgery on a 22-week-old viable baby in the womb to improve its life, but aborting a baby girl in the womb at the same age? Okay, so this gets back into their ridiculous presupposition about people wantonly destroying infant life at a late term stage where the fetus has reached viability. I am totally. I don't have I don't see a contradiction here, because I'm totally fine leaving that up to the decision making of the mother and her the medical personnel taking care of her. So both of those situations are fine with me, and I don't view them as mutually contradictory. And then also as far as the question of viability, it comes back to ultimately, I'm not going to try to make that decision for other people. That's what it comes back to. And so because of that, I don't really have an opinion on that issue one way or the other. Um, is the source of our human dignity the wishes our parents have for us? I already talked about what I think the sources of human dignity are and how that evolves and changes over time. But ultimately, human dignity is something that we have to come to a capacity to understand and recognize on the individual level, because it concerns something that is going to be an innate aspect of our understanding of the world. So we have to come to that realization on our own. That said, I'm hesitant to say that there are objective standards of when human dignity occurs, because it negates one of the important capacities, which is of humanity, which is coming to comprehend the concept of human dignity. So because the idea is conceptual and evolving, I don't think that I could make an objective statement about when human dignity objectively occurs. Uh, okay. So, do you believe that babies are born into poverty are less valuable than babies that are born into wealth? No. The question, see, the thing is here, what they're trying to do is reverse engineer a common pro-choice argument, which is to say that babies would be facing extreme poverty under certain circumstances and that kind of thing. And the argument there is not that those lives are of less value than the lives of the wealthy or anything like that. So they're trying to reverse engineer a pro-choice argument, not understanding what the nature of that pro-choice argument is. But no, I don't think that lives are inherently more or less valuable because of the wealth that they're born into. Do you think that the actions of our parents, good or bad, make us any more or less valuable than people born with different parents? Okay, so this is another attempt to reverse engineer a pro-choice argument, which is the argument that, well, what about, for example, if a woman is made pregnant as a result of being raped? What then? And the argument being that, oh, the father was a horrible person, but the child should not have to suffer the penalty, suffer the penalty as a result. Um, that's not the argument is not that the argument being made there is not that the child bears a tangential guilt carried by the father and should be punished, and therefore should be punished. That's not the argument being made. The argument being made is that it is morally unacceptable to force a woman to continue to be re-traumatized and continue to endure trauma, and on top of that being forced to carry out labor she did not agree to perform, on the basis of having been raped, or on the or excuse me, on the basis of the rapist having left her pregnant. That is the argument is that that is morally unacceptable. And yes, I do think that it is very morally acceptable to terminate a pregnancy in the first trimester of pregnancy that was the result of rape, rather than forcing the woman to carry that child to term. And no, I don't think that putting it up for adoption is acceptable in that circumstance at all. So anyway, do you feel that if a woman really wants to have an abortion but the baby survives and is born alive, that the medical team who attempted to abort the baby should provide the newborn with medical care? Yes, I do. And the reason I don't have a problem with that is because, yet again, this is based on another complete bullshit pro-life talking point. It's something that's been circulated forever. Donald Trump tried to run on this premise, which is the idea that I tried to run on this idea that there are children who are surviving abortion and then being killed anyway. That's not what's happening. In reality, what is happening is you have circumstances where the child is delivered, and like I described in the Cosmopolitan article earlier, is delivered in a situation where it is in the process of dying, often in excruciating pain, and the doctors choose to put it out of its misery. That is what we are talking about. We are not talking about a child being born and then being born healthy and able to survive outside the womb and then being terminated by the being terminated by abortion providers. That does not happen. The only case that I have ever heard provided by any by any anti-abortion pro-life group is the case of Kermit Gosnell, who is a completely incompetent abortion provider and a disgusting human being. And yes, he did kill babies after they had been born outside of the womb. And you know what? He is now in prison where he should be, and that was before Roe v. Wade was overturned, because that's not the reality of the situation. Kermit Gosnell was a deranged lunatic masquerading as a medical care provider. That is not what is going on with actual abortions. It is not a policy to kill a healthy, viable, living baby after it has been removed from a mother's womb, if it's possible for it to survive. That is not occurring. Anyway, should should baby girls and boys who survive abortion attempts get care if they cannot breathe on their own? We already addressed that. That's an outgrowth of medical care, so yes. Do you think infanticide is ever justified? Yes, there are. You provided an example of it earlier with the case of the conjoined twin babies, where one of them's going to die, and we're risking letting the disease spread to the other one. Yes, there are such circumstances. They do exist. Should baby girls and boys who survive... yeah, we already talked about that. Does everyone really deserve a chance at life, or can circumstances change that? Yes, I do think circumstances can change that. We've been talking about that already. Do you think babies in the womb with disabilities are stronger candidates for abortion? It comes down to each individual question. I'm not going to rule unilaterally on that, because again, if I did, I would inevitably encounter situations where I thought that it was acceptable. So no, I can't make a unilateral discussion on that. It would have to come down to a question of what disabilities. And even so, that is rendered irrelevant, because as I said before, I'm not going to impose my values on other people. Should parents who find out their baby is disabled have priority access to abortion? Again, it's a disingenuous question. We're talking about circumstances where they need to terminate the pregnancy. That's where we have priority access to abortion. Do you believe we get our human dignity at birth? This dignity thing keeps coming up. I've already gotten into it. Black Americans only make up about 13% of the population, but they make up 38% of all abortions. Do you think that this is good or bad? At the risk of sounding sarcastic, I do not think that that is good or bad. It's simply a statistical reality. I don't put any moral imperative on it one way or the other. Should corporate America use its power and wealth to help abort more babies in poverty-stricken countries in Africa? Yes, because anyone who is having a problem with that cannot imagine the torturous existence that they are bringing a child into. Bringing a child into that existence is an existence that they will that there is virtually no chance they could ever escape from. An existence where they will most likely die in horrible, horrible conditions. A horrible, hellish existence that no sane human being could ever wish on an innocent child. It is entirely, entirely reasonable to prevent that occurrence from happening. If you want to change the circumstances in those countries, then you need to proactively work to improve the standard of living in those countries, because you are talking about a child being born so that it can stand bone thin, naked, and bloated on a dirt road with no access to food, clean drinking water, medical care, or anything like that. You cannot begin to, if you think that that is even an issue, then you cannot begin to imagine the circumstances into which those children are having to live. You would never want to call that giving someone a chance at life. And that chance at life thing is so ridiculous, because it really is a chance, and it is a chance that they are 99.99999% just going to suffer and die from. It is completely inhuman to say that a person ought to live in that circumstance. And preventing that circumstance does include the completely unnecessary bringing of more people into that circumstance. And so, no, I have no problem whatsoever with that. Then it goes on, do you think it is elitist or offensive to tell family-oriented cultures outside of the United States that they should not have children? No, I don't. People are going to get offended by everybody's opinion, no matter what that opinion is. Whatever your opinion is, there is somebody who can get offended by it. So no, I have no hesitation about holding that position. If they are family oriented, then they need to focus on creating a hospitable circumstance that is conducive to a positive family lifestyle, not bringing children into abject poverty. And when I say poverty, I don't mean being poor. I mean subhuman levels of existence, levels of existence that would not be acceptable for animals to live in. And going on, finally, do you think that there should be more medical alternatives for women who choose not to have an abortion? I'm not sure what that's getting at. You can have as many medical options and medical alternatives as you want. Just don't take people's rights away. Don't force people to do things they don't want to do. That's my guiding principle. So, anyway, hopefully that answers those questions, and hopefully that illuminates why I don't need to necessarily get into the rest of this book. But what do you guys think? I have a pizza and an episode of Stranger Things to enjoy.